Hi everyone, it's Ren here, and I'm here for another video, which will not be on open monism today. It's about to go dark. It's currently sundown or sunset. Can never quite figure out which one is which. And then you have dusk and twilight, and I'm French, so all this to me is like vaguely similar. But anyway, that's not the topic. Today I would like to talk to you about something I've been thinking about recently, but also, for quite a bit of time, it just comes back in my mind. And I figured it could be an interesting topic to discuss. And so the topic that I want to discuss today is that of the relationship between so-called type, MBTI type, and writing. When I mention MBTI type, as was suggested by one of my previous videos, what I mean is usually a type insofar as it corresponds roughly to a certain function stack. I am more of a believer in function stacks, in cognitive functions, as Carl Jung himself developed them, than in the actual typology of Myers-Briggs. But the typology is useful because it allows the reference to actual indeed, types of people, keeping in mind that people only roughly correspond or tend towards this or that type. So I think that the topic of how types relate to different activities is an interesting one, insofar as types and the cognitive function stack that are behind them are subscribed to by people. So in this video I will just drop like a couple insights from my perspective that I have collected about different types and styles of writing, and possibly also strengths and weaknesses of writing in approaching writing. And the strengths and the weaknesses are theoretical. They're not necessarily going to apply because there are counterexamples, but it's based on my experience. And I think, for the strengths and the weaknesses, I probably will be drawing on mostly the INFJ type, because that's the one I know the best. It's the one that I inhabit. And it's, I don't think I would be quite capable of speaking of the strengths and weaknesses of other types, at least not anywhere near in as much detail. So how do I consider this question of the relationship between writing and type? Well, I think you could sort of categorize it broadly into sensor writing and intuitive writing, S writing and N writing. I am sort of a lot more familiar with intuitive writing, so I'll be mostly talking about that in this video. But I could only assume that the sensor writing is writing that is very much more down to earth, very descriptive, and that deals with matters that are not too much out there. I have always heard that someone like Ernest Hemingway was a censor at ESTP. Everybody seems to agree on that. I'm going to shock people here, but actually have read very little Hemingway. I read The Old Man and the Sea when I was very young, but I can't remember it so well. And I have not read Farewell to Arms. I have not read For Whom the Bell Tolls, although I'd like to. But so again, my favorite writers are pretty much all intuitives. So how do I perceive the difference? Maybe I could start with a type, for instance. I think that oftentimes a type that is often associated with good writing, or with writing, or having a natural affinity for writing, more than maybe any other type, is the INFP type. If you look online at the sort of historical profiles of INFPs that are famous INFPs, insofar as you would again subscribe to it, you'll find that like a lot of them are famous writers, and to have read some of them, maybe a substantial enough sample of them, I'm inclined to agree that, for example, someone like Shakespeare is indeed an INFP, someone like Kafka is indeed an INFP, someone like Saint Augustine is indeed an INFP, Rousseau is an INFP, Edgar Poe is an INFP. So you have a lot of them, and like almost all the amazing French writers are INFPs. Like, it's, in the case of the French, it's like almost all of them seem to be INFPs. And it's quite interesting to sort of try to emphasize why it is. I think that why the INFPs tend to have this affinity for writing is they seem to have a really good combination of a very sharp acuity for detail, for emotional depth, like sort of detail in terms of being able to describe scenes, right? Like with a lot of versatility, being able to like build a lot of different characters. And so if you like, the sort of emotional depth comes from their main function being FI. The sort of like versatility they have for describing different scenes with an interesting style is, I think, due to Annie in combination with FI. But they also have this amazing ability to store so much detail about the characters that they create in the environments that they create, and I think that's due to SI, which is their tertiary function. And so in a lot of books by INFP writers, you'll see that like there is a lot of emotional depth, a lot of detail, and like sort of variety of different scenes and settings, and a lot of background to the characters. So imagine that you have characters that have a lot of background, you know a lot about them, and they also have great depth, and they're involved in lots of different settings. Well, like that's going to be very conducive to like identifying with the story, with the characters, because we are looking for like emotional depth. We are looking for characters that we can identify with. INFPs would be very good at creating characters that seem to be true to life, involved in settings that seem to be true to life, but at the same time are still profound, original, daring, because of intuition. And like if you take these three things together, if you take like an INFP who's a genius, that can be so powerful, because you will just be transported into an emotional realm that is at the same time kind of easy to believe and to relate to, you know? And that's like the interplay of FI, NE, and SI for that is incredible. Because in literature, you know, like if you want a story, a character to be emotionally potent on the reader, you want the reader to relate, to never forget about the experience of writing that character. You need to have the ability to make it credible. I think credibility is really underrated, even in science fiction. Even in science fiction stories, there is a need for the character at least to be credible. Like they need to react in certain ways. They need to, they need to be like truthful in a way. And the INFP will have a very, very almost like inward, innate sense of how someone would behave in a scene, even if that scene seems to be a bit fantastical. Fantastical scene, any, but with FI, they will just have this like preternatural sense of what would happen. And combined with introverted sensing, the amount of detail that could be added, the amount of characters that you have in a book like In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust, perhaps the greatest French writers of the 20th century, one of the best writers of the 20th century. I'm saying this, gotta be completely honest, I have not read a lot of his work, but I trust my brother, and I'm half familiarity with some of the works, but like it seems to be absolutely incredible. Proust wrote like a 7th book sort of saga on remembering his life in every little detail of every little emotion, and it's just insane. It's insane, and just through this developing this concept of time as experienced through memory. It's only an INFP could do that. So that's why I think that INFPs seem to be particularly gifted at writing. Of course, other intuitives can be, and sensors, but here I'll be talking about intuitives, can have a gift. And maybe I could just talk briefly about INFJs since this is my type. Well, based on my experience, INFJs are really, really good for having like a vision. So they have an idea, which is kind of abstract. It doesn't start with emotions. They have this idea that they want to explore, and they will be good then at sort of creating characters that will guide them towards that idea and toward making that idea universal. So instead of having, like usually in INFPs, the characters, you can identify with them, but like they very much are individuals in a setting. In the case of INFJs, a lot of the time you get the sense that in writing, the characters, there is a message and the characters are part of that kind of saga, that kind of story that unfolds. And they can be sort of identified together with a universal. So if you see it really, for example, in someone like Dostoevsky, you have this kind of idea, for example, in Crime and Punishments, of like the human condition and the relationship of people towards morality. What is the sense of morality? What is the sense of punishment? What is the sense of absolution, forgiveness, purity, helping one another, ending one another? You know, all these great themes. They are not like explored through the lens of the emotional sort of emotional existence, emotional density of a character or a series of characters. No, the characters are always evolving together vis-a-vis the themes. It's never really focusing on a single one. In Dostoevsky, you really see that. I would say that Dostoevsky is impressive more for his like psychological insights, like using the emotions that characters feel as kind of universal forms of psychology, and it has a lot of depth to it, and it explores his vision with amazing penetrating insight. But it's not so much about the individual lives of the individual people, and you'll notice that in someone like Dostoevsky, but you also see that in Faulkner, you also see that in Hermann Hesse, whom I am reading at the moment. Like, it's incredible how like you have this kind of almost mystical vision, these great philosophical themes in the background all the time, and you get the sense that like the characters are really just interacting with these themes. Of course, you can get attached to them, you can find them really, really interesting, but like the INFJ writer is not going to spend as much time as the INFP writer delving into the very, very private realm of emotion. Usually what they feel will be applied to the insights because of extroverted feeling, and the insight will be because of introverted intuition, and the interplay between the two creates that. So you start from the characters having interactions, feeling certain things, and you move towards the universal message. Whereas in INFPs, oftentimes what happens is that the more the story progresses, the more each different characters becomes like really individual, really amazing, really rich, nuanced in his own right, or in her own right, or in their own right. And you identify with them. You don't identify with like them as the embodiment of a particular type or theme, you know. I think there's a tendency towards typology in INFJness in general. I mean, after all, Carl Jung was an INFJ, and because an INFP together really seek to grip at certain patterns in the behaviors of people, for instance, and to extract from that an essence, a type that could fit sort of everybody, like having that universal view. In INFPs, there's a cultivation of individuality in relation to the universal, but to put, like, if you like, the spotlight on the individual. And you can really see that in the writing. In the INFJ, the strength, I think, is in the vision, in the psychological insight that relates to the universal, the sort of mystical sort of vibe that you get a lot, the ability to do a lot of stream of consciousness. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that because my video was already long, but like stream of consciousness in an INFJ is very, very interesting. The ability to just play with language in such a way as to like really invent a new language while always keeping in mind the purpose of the writing, rather than it go into shit because of too much experimentation. Oftentimes in INFJ writer, the experimentation can be managed because there is like always this anti vision driving the work. And with FE, that experimentation could be made if it's well done, relatable. At the same time, you'll notice that in INFJ writers like Dostoevsky, absolutely, in Hess too, although Hess is better at like giving detail. Dostoevsky just doesn't seem to care about like describing scenes in detail. It's always very expressionistic how he draws his scenes. And in Hess, apart from the glass bead game, like you get a lot of that too. It's about creating like this mystical mood, this mood, this you know, it's not as material. There's something a bit more immaterial about INFJ writing than INFP writing. And so it's different strengths, not necessarily like description, but always description at the service of the vision and the universalization of feeling, I think. And I think I will just stop here because it's been a long video. I've only really covered INFPs and INFJ writers, but I think those are really the ones I'm the most familiar with. So maybe it's better if I stop there. If I am inspired, I might do a video on like INTP writers, INTJ writers, because they exist, and I'm a bit familiar with them as well. Particularly INTP writers, because I'm a big fan of Borges, or I'm pronouncing his name horribly, I'm sorry. Any Spanish speaker is going to butcher me, but I butchered his name, so I would deserve it. And INTJ writers as well, like Sartre and other ones. But, you know, I like to do a video also on type and philosopher. I've always wanted to do that. I have sketched it in forum posts before and in my own mind. And I really see patterns in like, you know, the sort of type that a philosopher has and the way he approaches philosophy. So I want to do that. I might do it in a couple days. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this video, even though it was not quite as comprehensive as I wanted it to be. But time is running out. So see you guys.